It could be funding the building of a park, helping someone rebuild their home after disaster, supporting someone with huge medical bills. Social crowdfunding is changing how we help those in need. Joining us now for more on this, Daryl Hatton. He's founder and CEO at fundraiser.com, and Sabrina Nicosia, National Marketing Research Director at raisehope.org. And it's good to have you two in those chairs. Thanks for coming in at TVO. What's, it's a fairly new term. I haven't seen this before. Personal crowdfunding or misery crowdfunding. Daryl, you want to tell us what that is?
Well, I like the part of the personal crowdfunding a little better.
As opposed to misery
crowdfunding.
But there is a lot of that to it, isn't there?
Well, it's helping people use social media to raise money for almost any kind of cause, but particularly around things where they've had a financial crisis. They've had a house burned down, they've got a critical illness that they need extra treatment for, they may have to travel to that. They may want to have their spouse join them for that treatment because they live out of town. And it's helping to pay for those kinds of expenses where it's really funding and hopefully alleviating some of the misery that goes with these tragedies.
Sabrina, how much of this is going on nowadays?
A lot, and it's increased a lot in the most recent years. I was looking up some stats in preparation for this show, and it's tough to find stats specifically for Canada, but they're saying that the crowdfunding industry is doubling every year, and I've heard stats for 2015, the projections to be anywhere between $10 billion to $20 billion, so I'm sure it falls somewhere in between there.
In North America alone or worldwide?
Globally, yeah.
Say that number again?
$10 billion to $20 billion, yeah.
These are just everyday people looking for, I mean, they haven't got this big organization underneath them or anything like that, right? It's just everyday people.
Some of them, people raise money and crowdfund for a variety of things. A lot of it is for social causes, but there's also people who crowdfund for artistic reasons, people who are looking to crowdfund for their business. So those numbers include all of those people.
Can you give us a better understanding of what persuades somebody to give money to somebody they almost certainly don't know?
Well, it's interesting because that's one of the myths that gets started with crowdfunding. A lot of crowdfunding is really about the people in your community already and in your existing social networks who give money to help you out. So the best example is usually someone has a friend who has cancer or has had a problem. They'll start a campaign on behalf of that friend, share it on social media with their neighbors, their coworkers, their just the people in their community that are already there. That's where the first contributions come into a campaign. And then because of the ability of social media to spread that message much wider, then you start having strangers who may look at this. But they're really still usually friends of friends. It's only once you get some media coverage and someone noticing this story and promoting it in a broader sense that you tend to have strangers donate and contribute.
And would you say most of the time it's just that first group?
Most of the time it's just the first group, sometimes the friends of friends, and rarely does it get up beyond that without help.
Here's the thing also, Sabrina, if you write a check to the Salvation Army, you know who the Salvation Army is, you know what they're going to use it for, etc. How do you know when you're giving somebody something here in a crowdfunding, so you've responded to something on Facebook, how do you know it's the real deal?
Well, I guess it depends what the campaign's all about. So if the campaign is about somebody personally needing money, a lot of times, and it's interesting, they've done some research into that. The fraud rate's relatively low, they say, because again, you're reaching out to your initial group. So if you are doing something fraudulent, you're probably not going to attract those types of people. In the case of the charities, and it varies with platform to platform, but with our platform, if somebody's raising money for a charity, we give the money directly to the charity. So in those cases, you definitely know what's going there.
But if they go through you, you take a cut, I assume, for providing that service?
Exactly. We take a percentage of the donation or contribution amount.
How much?
So it's 5% if you reach your goal and 9% if you don't.
We've seen, I mean, you're right, they're not frequent, but I think probably a lot of people watching this right now will remember a case of a young girl on Facebook who put a very heartrending story out there about how she was dying of cancer and her last wish was ... And she got a ton of money come in, and then somebody outed her and said, this is just phony. I mean, what recourse do you have if you've been caught in a snag like that?
A little bit depends on time. If the community reports the campaign very, very early, there's a good chance that none of that money will actually go to the person and it can be refunded. And we work very closely with our payment processors on fraud avoidance and helping to make sure that this kind of scenario can be dealt with very quickly if it happens. But it's really incumbent on the community to help report these things because there's no way that we as platforms can cost effectively vet all these causes and still make it possible for the people that are trying to do good things to do them and get the best results.
You need the Twitter police to be on guard in some respects.
Well, it's kind of neighborhood watch.
Yeah.
You really want to be looking over and helping make sure that this is going to what they say it will go to.
I'm going to raise a couple of examples here. Again, I suspect lots of people have heard about. There was this guy in Detroit who said he walked 33 kilometers to work. There was just an absolutely heartbreaking story of that young kid who walked out of an apartment building in Toronto, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the morning, froze to death. There he is right there, poor little Elijah. These campaigns went viral and they raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in a few days. Again, for people that surely 95% of the people who gave didn't know. How often does that happen?
Not very often.
It's rare?
I would say that those are the rare cases. You know, it's interesting to note too that those are actually people who campaigns were created on their behalf versus them creating their own campaigns, let's say to raise money for their cat's medical bills or whatever the case may be. And I think it's, you know, the common denominator with all of those is that it really sort of strikes a chord with all of us. You know, there was something inspiring about James, who was walking to work every single day. It wasn't just about the fact that the bus route didn't cover where he needed to go or he didn't have a car. It was the fact that like through all of that, he persevered and he walked every single day. And of course, the story of Elijah, I mean, that touched so many people in Toronto and across the country, and that's what it is. I think it really, it resonates with us, and I think that's why those take off.
Does the sector itself, there's James Roberts, I guess he got a nice car at the end of the day, didn't he? I mean, he raised
the car was even donated to him by a dealership that wanted to get their name associated with this media story now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is this, I mean, these kinds of stories, you say they're rare, but when they go viral, a lot of attention paid to this kind of fundraising. Do you, being in the sector, like these kinds of things?
I'm a bit of a mixed bag on it. We don't want to take anything away from the person that is having that money raised for them, but there's a place where it's distorting the primary purpose of helping more at the community funding level, where crowdfunding initially started, and it also brings up a much greater opportunity for fraud. In the case with the fellow in Detroit, 3 different campaigns were started on his behalf. The first big one, and then there was a couple others that started. And it's, as platforms, we have to patrol for copycats because there's people that can take advantage of that interest and potentially divert funds.
In that case, were the 3 actually legit?
Well, the funds haven't got to them yet, so it's hard to tell. But I think that they were good intentioned, but sometimes they're not good intentioned. And after some tragedies, tornadoes, storms, we see more of these will start showing up where people are trying to raise on behalf of someone else. And we really recommend that if you're contributing to a crowdfunding campaign, you know someone involved to help make sure that it's legitimate.
Here's a bit of an odd question, Sabrina, but they say, I remember Catherine Anno did a great documentary on people who win the lottery, and almost invariably it ruins your life, right? I mean, it changes your life and it ruins your life.
Yeah.
If you've had just an average life and then suddenly you're worth 25 million bucks. Do you have any evidence that this happens to people who are the focal point of crowdfunding? Well,
it's starting to show, and that was something that James had spoke about, was that people were coming to him asking him for money. He didn't feel safe in his home. He actually moved. So in cases like that, I would say, yeah, when someone's getting a huge chunk of money, for sure, there's potential for that.
Do most campaigns succeed?
No.
They don't?
No, they don't. For every, you know, the stats are always changing, but for every 10 campaigns, probably half of them fail. Depending on the type of funding, there's different types, fixed funding and flexible funding. So depending on those factors will sort of determine part of your success rate. But in the case of personal crowdfunding, which is usually always flexible funding, meaning you keep what you raise even if you don't reach your goal, I would say about 40% fail rate.
40% fail rate, meaning they don't reach the goal.
They don't reach or they don't reach even close to their goal. They didn't even get, you know, close to what they were trying to achieve.
Is that your experience too?
It is. Sometimes it's based on what the expectation was. If they're expecting now from all the media coverage that they're going to raise $100,000 to help them with their cancer treatment, that's a very high bar, and they might be disappointed. But if they had another $15,000 or $20,000 come to them from friends and family, it's a win because they didn't have it before, and every dollar can go towards solving that problem. It may not solve it, but it'll certainly make it better.
Does this, you know, on the one hand, it does make you feel good when you send in 10 or 20 bucks to somebody who's really down in their luck, and maybe you've got a chance to turn their life around. Does this give you a false sense, though, that you're repairing the world, if I can use that pretentious expression? Does it give you a false sense that you're repairing the world? Because in effect, one guy's hit lightning in a bottle, but 99.9% of everybody else who may be in the same situation, they're not going to get that kind of help at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Does that give you a pause at all?
I think people have been talking about with the example of James. Great, we help one person, but it didn't solve the problem. It didn't solve the problem that Detroit has a bus route issue. Right. But I would say that maybe that's not the role of crowdfunding, and I think that there's people who are in charge of managing that bus route, and that's now. This campaign has shone a light on that. I mean, I didn't know that Detroit had a bus route problem, but now I do, and a lot more people do. So I think if the policymakers and the key decision makers use this as their ally, as a friend, as a way to shine a light on an issue, then I think that it's a positive thing.
This sets up nicely the discussion to come. So stay put 1 second, everybody. Up next, we're going to broaden this discussion and bring traditional charities into the conversation right after this. Social crowdfunding is changing how people in need are helped. Joining us now to add their perspective, traditional philanthropists. We welcome Bruce McDonald. He's the CEO at Imagine Canada. Marina Glogovac, CEO of Canada Helps. Caroline Riseborough, Director with the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Mark Bloomberg, Partner in Nonprofit and Charity Law and Philanthropy with Bloomberg Siegel LLP. And we welcome back Daryl Hatton and Sabrina Nicosia. Cecil B. DeMille would be proud. Look at this cast of thousands around this table here. Marina, I want to start with you. Explain the difference between what Canada Helps does and the kind of crowdfunding that we've been talking about so far.
Right. So Canada Helps is a Canadian charity. We run an online donations portal where people can donate to and fundraise for any registered charity in Canada. So we have all 86,000 of them listed in our back end.
86,000 registered charities with your website.
That's right. That we just pull from the CRA site. So whoever is a registered charity in Canada, we have them on our site. So people can come to Canada Helps, they can donate, they can set up a monthly donation, they can give a gift of securities to any charity, which is very great. And they can also fundraise for any charity in Canada.
Is that different from what we have just heard?
It's different in a way that we do not allow fundraising for anything that is not charitable, because we issue charitable tax receipts, and our entire purpose as a charity is to facilitate giving to and fundraising and engagement with the charitable sector in Canada.
Okay. Bruce, in which case would you classify giving to a personal crowdfunding campaign, the likes of which we were just discussing, would you call that charitable giving?
Well, I mean, I think the notion of crowdfunding has been around forever. I mean, if you can actually go back as far as the Statue of Liberty, where there was a crowdfunding campaign to pay for the pedestal, because it wasn't paid for when it arrived in the US. And it's been going on forever. So I think the notion of people wanting to help people because they see an instantaneous need has been around for a long time, and I think is going to continue.
Is that charity, though? In the way that you understand it, with CRA tax returns and all of that.
I mean, the definition of charity, which has been around since the 1600s, I think that there are obviously rules and regulations that charities need to adhere to. And I think one of the challenges with crowdfunding is this lack of accountability that happens there. So I think it's important that when Canadians are thinking about where they give their money, that they actually take a look as to, is it going to an individual, a family, or an institution that has those checks and balances in place?
I asked the question, Caroline, and I saw you shaking your head like this. So what are you trying to say?
Well, I think if we go back to the definition of charity, and philanthropy in particular, it is really the use of private resources, often given by individuals, for public benefit. And that is a very important term, public benefit. And when we take a look at some of these crowdfunding platforms, we are now using private resources for private individuals and for their benefits. That is not charity and philanthropy. And I think we touched on this earlier, that oftentimes what's being facilitated with these crowdfunding platforms platforms is private individuals are benefiting, but we're not addressing the systemic issues that need fixing, and this is where charity comes in. Our quality of life is dependent upon the charitable and nonprofit sector being able to address these underlying issues that have public benefit for all of us. And this is actually diverting resources away from that. And that is really my concern as a fundraiser and here representing the Association of Fundraising Professionals.
The distinction, Mark, that Caroline is making, does that matter?
Yeah, I do think it does matter. In some cases, some of the individuals that are being money is being raised for in terms of crowdfunding, they could, in a sense, be considered something charitable. But generally speaking, most of the stuff would be very broad, and it would probably not be, and there would be a huge private benefit for some of them. So it wouldn't be charitable. And I agree with Caroline's point that the biggest problem is if we rely too much on crowdfunding, we're basically turning our social safety net into a bit of a lottery. So that instead of providing things that are really necessary, that we all can agree are really important that everyone get them, it now becomes you have to have a great story, you have to be lucky enough to have someone who's media savvy, and if 1 in 10,000 you'll luck it out and you'll get $100,000. But for many of the other people, you know, their target might be $100 or $200 and they're raising $10 over a year period. So they're hardly making very much. So it very much is a situation where a small number will potentially win a lot, as in a lottery, but most who are getting involved will not get much out of it.
Sabrina, I'm not hearing the love around the table here for what it is you guys do. Do you want to respond to some of this?
Well, I think it's interesting. So, I mean, there's so many different types of campaigns. Of course, charities can fundraise for themselves and encourage their supporters to fundraise on their behalf. So I think in that sense, of course, if the money's going to a charity, then it's charitable. But in some of these, I guess what we're calling the misery campaigns, it's sort of like an emergency fund too. Although, you know, the person James who was walking in Detroit, that wasn't the case. But let's say something happened and someone's house burned down. Usually they would set up a bank account at, you know, at one of the major banks, and people would just donate to that. So in those cases, you know, at least there's some transparency here. And a lot of those campaigns that we're talking about, people saw that they had reached their goal, and people kept donating. And you know, I'm not so sure that, and I'm not, you know, I don't know, but I think that if I'm a supporter of a charity, if I've decided to then donate to the Elijah Marsh campaign, that it wouldn't come out of my budget for giving to the charity that I support, that it would be in addition to.
Although it is interesting, I mean, because there's an interesting contradiction with crowdfunding and the support of the existing charitable organizations. I mean, charities right now are kind of under what I would call unparalleled scrutiny in terms of costs of administration and overhead, and being accountable and transparent for those dollars, and also ensuring that the money that's donated, that there are outcomes and impact for those.
And no political agenda, as the current government has changed the rules
well,
to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, though, that at the same time as society is demanding this very open and transparent look at charities, that people will give money with absolutely no checks and balances in place. And so it's an interesting contradiction right now.
We have the opportunity where the technique of crowdfunding is being very effectively used by charities, in that it is using social media, talking about specific projects that are needing to be funded, and in engaging the community and helping promote that. The ALS Challenge and the Ice Bucket Challenge is a great example of that. We're also, the data says that a lot of the campaigns that we have are not aiming for this huge media burst. It's actually neighbors and people taking care of each other to try and alleviate financial stress. Is there a place for a charity involved in that very personal connection between members of a community with the associated overhead that comes with all those things, and particularly the slowdown in time? If there's a critical funding problem for someone, they need to travel for surgery right now because they have leukemia or they have something that needs instant. If I have to wait for a government application program to go through, it would be lovely if we've had that happen. If you're dying of leukemia, you don't have time to wait.
Marina, is that a fair point?
I think it is a fair point. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I think that, you know, from my point of view, this technology, this platform, this huge peer-to-peer, it's what I call a peer-to-peer phenomenon that has emerged in the internet in the last 10 years, and it's transforming a lot more, you know, areas of our lives. I mean, it facilitates sharing, compassion, caring for one another, helping others, connection. So from that point of view, I consider it like a wonderful thing. I think it's here to stay because it's really driven by millennials. It's driven by younger generations who want to fundraise, who say, you know, according to, you know, Case Foundation study, they want to fundraise, they don't want to be asked. So we're looking at different behavior that is coming, especially from millennials, and millennials are coming into a major position of power in a few years. It is here to stay. It's an incredibly lucrative opportunity, which is why there is, close to 1,000 platforms just in North America with opportunists, with entrepreneurs, with business people racing to cash in. And I'm not assuming that everyone has, the best intentions. It's a lucrative market. It's a lucrative opportunity. In the States, this market has expanded overnight to several $billion. So, of course, that it represents an incredible opportunity. And it is democratizing access. So it enables both small and big charities to do something. Of course, it always goes, it goes back to know-how and stuff. On the flip side, though, there is a relative obscurity. You don't really know, most people don't know that the money doesn't go to a cause. It goes to a person who is actually doing the fundraising campaign.
You think people don't know that?
Well, I don't know that they do. I'm not sure.
I don't know, when the guy hasn't got a...
We emphasize that point.
Well, I mean, you have so many platforms. You have hundreds and hundreds of platforms. The barriers to entry to create a fundraising platform are very low. Like, it's not a huge...
I think what we're touching on is some of the ethical issues around this. So anyone can go and start a fundraising campaign. And that is a real challenge because the fundraising profession is governed by certain ethical principles. And it's really the wild, wild west through some of these crowdfunding platforms. And so I think the concern in all of this is how are people going out there doing fundraising with the ethics that we've put in place? So for instance, the donor accountability, ensuring the donations go where the donor intended to, the transparency, the stewardship that happens after. None of this is happening. And then the other piece that we're not necessarily talking about, but I think we should touch on, is a percentage of the donations go to these for-profit companies that are creating these crowdfunding platforms. And so it's a very lucrative model. In fact, there's some interesting research that came out of Europe recently that found that nonprofit fundraising, crowdfunding campaigns actually do better than those crowdfunding campaigns focused on business. So it's actually to the benefit of for-profit companies to get involved in this type of crowdfunding because there's money on the table to be had.
You want to speak to that?
Which part of it?
Well, let's good point. Let's pick up on the last part there, which is that this is, I mean, while you may be doing good in the world, it's a hell of a good business opportunity as well. I mean, we do live in a capitalist society, so I'm not sure this is a terrible thing, but
yeah,
and I
think in most cases, there's usually, when someone's facilitating something, there's a fee involved in that. With the case of Movember, for example, that money goes to Prostate Cancer Canada, but Movember takes a cut of that, right? Because they're doing certain things. They're advertising, they put this program together, they are, the flow through.
Movember is a charity now in Canada.
But they do take money, they do take a percentage before that money goes somewhere. So I'm not so sure that's such a bad thing. And I think it's just part of doing business. We're creating the platform, we have costs involved in that. So, yeah.
Although I think it's interesting because to Caroline's point around, there's sort of a blurring of lines. With so many structures or opportunities in place now, whether it's your classic charity, nonprofit organizations, social enterprises, social purpose businesses, I think it's a very complex environment for people to understand everything now. And I think, when you think about sort of the classic charity model, there is maybe a little trepidation about reputational risk. If something were to happen that was public in one of these areas that's not as well governed or as I call them, the checks and balances around accountability aren't in place, that because there's so many of these various structures, that people might not actually know that it wasn't a registered charity or one of the organizations that has structure and support.
I think you all know Elizabeth Renzetti around this table. She writes in the Globe and Mail, a interesting commentator on our society. Let me read a little of what she wrote recently and see if this provokes any of you to a response. As the social safety net phrase, the needy and desperate have turned to websites such as Hand Up, GoFundMe, and You Caring to meet their basic needs. Needs that would have been met even a couple of decades ago by community or government services. And while it's lovely to see the great generosity of donors, it's also enraging, she says, to think that there are a vast number of people who have had to resort, in essence, to online begging. What should be the work of society is fobbed off onto good-hearted individuals with tablets. What do we think?
Well, we were talking in the last segment about the difference between, where we believe that the essence of crowdfunding is best suited right now, which is taking care of the acute or emergency problems in a community, as opposed to that, which is an ongoing chronic problem in society. This person not having the ability to live within their means or live within the ability of their job to pay for their life.
But I'm not sure if crowdfunding is necessarily the answer to that. I mean, there's great initiatives underway by my colleague Bruce at Imagine Canada and others involved to do things to increase charitable giving in Canada, such as the stretch tax credit. So I mean, those are the mechanisms that we can utilize to be able to increase charitable giving in Canada, increase philanthropy, not necessarily these sort of unregulated digital systems.
Let me push back a little bit. You do CAMH as well? Mm-hmm. Okay, you do some fundraising for CAMH.
Yes.
So if somebody really cares a lot about mental health issues and they want to make a contribution to seeing the situation improved, they could give to CAMH, which I'm sure you think would be a nice thing to do. But the fact is, it goes into a massive global budget and you don't really know how they're going to use it. If I see that guy right there with a crowdfunding campaign and he's having mental health issues and he needs some help and he needs some money to go so he can go into a whatever, I know I can donate right to him and that one person there will get help and I know I've helped them. That's a fair point, isn't it?
It is a very fair point, but we know that donors are predisposed to wanting to help an individual directly. And there is very much an emotional connection with philanthropy and with giving. But it's not necessarily the best thing in terms of the benefit for society, because oftentimes taking an approach to change the system, so preventing, let's say, mental illness versus addressing it once someone is already in a desperate situation is really where we need to funnel the funds. So really taking more of a preventative approach as opposed to addressing the need once it strikes. And that is a part of the challenge.
But I think one of the areas that we talk about there is that is a long-term scenario. And we're talking about funding friends, neighbors, coworkers.
Now.
Not waiting for the longer-term societal change to happen. If we have someone in our lives that is severely influenced or affected by a disease, if we have to wait for that to funnel it through the proper channels to build the proper programs, that person may die in that time frame. One of the epiphany we had with Fundraiser was the first year when we had someone say, because you helped our daughter get treatment faster, we think you helped save her life. That wasn't waiting for a program to take care of her. They had to do it because she was dying of leukemia.
On the other hand, Mark, is there a concern here that people who do good by going to Fundraiser or whatever, they're helping one person, but they're not helping society? You may be under the impression that you're helping society, but you're not. Is that a concern?
Absolutely. If there was proper government funding, for example, of hospitals and healthcare and alternative types of healthcare, then you wouldn't have to rely on one person getting onto a crowdfunding platform or someone doing it on their behalf, because there could be 10,000 people and 9,999 are being ignored. So I think we're completely ignoring the systemic issue of, as a society, if we decide that we don't want homeless people in the middle of winter, then we need to put resources to it and not rely on, well, that homeless person has a particularly good story and therefore we'll help them. There are a huge number of agencies who are out there. They need more commitment of resources, and we need to have things like affordable housing and that. How many daycares have been built through crowdfunding, you know? And without daycare, you don't have a lot of the benefits that people get.
So Sabrina, let me ask you then, are you concerned that through the good works that you're doing, you're giving the public a false sense of them actually making a greater contribution to a societal problem?
I feel like that's not quite the role for crowdfunding. I mean, that's an entirely separate thing. Crowdfunding, we need the charities around. We need their insight. We need their strategic thinking. We need them to work hard to solve these systemic issues and execute on those missions. So I don't think that's the role of crowdfunding. But as I mentioned previously, I think crowdfunding does shine light on issues that have come up. And I think if people take advantage of those media moments, that it could work for everybody.
It's interesting though, I hear you saying we still need the bigger, more mainstream charities to do that good society-wide work. I hear them saying you're eating their lunch and they're nervous about that.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not sure that it comes out of a different budget for somebody. If you're going to donate to a one-off campaign to help the homeless man on the street, I'm not sure that I'm taking that away from my annual or monthly give that I give to another, that I give to a charity.
Does everybody know that?
Well, charity giving is not increasing dramatically in Canada. In fact, the number of donors is decreasing. So I think there is a bit of an argument that the philanthropic dollars are limited in Canada right now for a number of different reasons, and diverting funds to immediate causes are great. I'm not in any way saying that these causes aren't needed, but they can't take away from some of the systemic issues that we have to address as a sector.
I think it's important that we understand that some of these issues, whether it's homelessness, poverty, mental health issues, these are complex issues that require staying power and commitment in order to have a real and honest change. And so I think the important part is that people are informed and they make their choices so that they understand where their dollars are going, because we do need that profound change.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, I think the crowdfunding as a technique, as a new thing, is here to stay. And I think, and I know that in the States in 2013, out of $5 billion, which was the overall crowdfunding market, about 30% of that went to charity, so 1/3. I think, like you guys are saying, for me, the question is, an exciting one, is can this new collaborative, peer-to-peer based giving be used to actually cultivate more strategic, more proactive philanthropy, one that invests into capacity and infrastructure and systemic problem solving that will benefit everybody, right? And I think there are some, I just ran across this site called Change Gangs. So it's a collaboration of a group of people.
Sorry, what's
Change
it called?
Gangs.
Change
Gangs in the States. It's a collaborative philanthropy where a group of people chooses a charity based on data and evidence, and the platform actually helps them evaluate it, and then they commit to it. So, I mean, it's, an emergent model. It's small. There are charities like GiveDirectly.org who use data and also this type of direct appeal to facilitate giving. I think something else may emerge that uses this incredibly powerful peer-to-peer movement to maybe cultivate more strategic giving, which I agree is really needed. What we have, it's really taken some focus away from the fact that we need capacity building, we need infrastructure, we need investment to scale social profit and to really solve some of the pressing and systemic issues.
But you're talking about government now, aren't you, pretty much? Or certainly massive private sector involvement in government?
Yeah, I was in the private sector up until 2 years ago, so I'm still learning about the ecosystem here. But one thing that I noticed first is that it's incredibly absurd to step into the sector where you realize that nobody funds for capacity, that all these organizations are starved of essential capacity, and that's just how it is. And then expect them to really scale and to increase their impact. And I think the crowdfunding is kind of taking us away from that thought.
Well, let me pick up on this. I'm going to assume that Sabrina and Daryl, you two, at some point in your lives, have given to good old-fashioned mainstream charities. Mm-hmm. You're both nodding your head yes. Now I want to find out whether you two have ever contributed to a crowdfunding campaign. Have you? Anybody?
Online?
Yeah.
No, but have I done it other ways? Yes.
What other ways?
Well, I mean, the old-fashioned way. You went to your local bank and that's where you made the contribution.
Got it. But you've never done online. Caroline?
No, I have not.
Never have.
No, never.
Mark, no?
I got asked recently by a friend's friend whose daughter needed a treatment in Germany, and then I looked up the platform and all sorts of weird stuff came up. And plus they were charging like 12% all in, and I thought, wow, like I'm not comfortable giving through this platform. So
you weren't sure that there might have been some monkey business going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it was very pricey. It was incredibly pricey. So I mean, I don't know. I still feel that fees are important here, especially when especially when it comes to charitable giving. But so I wasn't comfortable. I wasn't comfortable.
I was just asked yesterday. I was on Facebook and I was looking at my feed and I saw a friend of mine who was asking for donations for a gentleman who was going to rehab, which was obviously of interest to me given my role at CAMH. And I looked at the site, and as I was going through it, I realized this is a for-profit site. They told me that there's no charitable donation being issued. There's going to be no accountability for exactly how my money is going to help this individual. And those are sort of the bedrock and foundation of philanthropy, and I struggled with that. As much as the cause was great, I just wasn't sure it was going to have the impact that it could have had I given to a well-known charity that I know is going to be accountable to me.
So one of the things I would look at here is asking the people who are affected by crowdfunding whether or not they care about the fees. And of campaigns that have the reasonable success with our platform, we get a 9 out of 10 rating in terms of they don't care about the fee because it's money that's come to them in a way that they weren't able to get before. So I hear your concerns about the efficiency of that, but in their terms, they solved the problem they were looking to solve at a fee that they were comfortable to pay. So we can argue about where that should be spent, but they are the ones that are the beneficiary. They were essentially the consumer.
Right, but in a society where these lines are blurring between the types of structures that are out there, this huge emphasis on looking at the cost of overhead, cost of fundraising, cost of administration for your kind of classic charities, for us, that makes me a little nervous in the sense that if there's a sense that there are rising costs and people aren't delineating about the form and structure, I think that's concerning.
Is there room, Mark, at this table and in this world for your two different types of model of charitable giving to get along?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I think that you have to define what you mean by crowdfunding. And so Marina's organization has been around for 15 years, basically doing this type of work. And, there are ones that raise money for charities, and it's really just using the technology for that. And then you have other ones where they raise money for charities or other causes which may or may not have a huge private benefit. So we have to divide that up. And then we have to realize, because crowdfunding has been around for a few years, we've already seen, quite a few years actually, in the UK, the Charity Commission jumped in to stop a particular platform where they were basically taking the money that was supposed to go to help these various people and in fact using it to pay for all their operational costs. And this is the accountability transparency issue. And unless you have some sort of real regulatory approach, unfortunately you're putting a lot of money into pools, and some of that money will sit there and it will be used for purposes that were not what was expected by the person giving the money.
I guess I should ask the flip side of the earlier question, which is, Daryl and Sabrina, have you ever given to crowdfunding campaigns?
Yes.
You have.
Yep.
And you have too.
Yep.
Yep.
And just to key on to your point about the pooling of funds, both Sabrina and I's platforms work on a very important principle, which is the money flows directly from the contributor to the recipient and not pooled by us. We do not hold the money. And we, in fact, helped PayPal and other payment processors develop these techniques to make sure that this would flow completely and clearly through to the user. So there isn't the risk that the platform would run away with the funds.
Okay.
And
Last
sorry,
word here?
and in our case, when someone donates to a charity, we verify that charity, and we actually we partner with Canada Helps, and we issue tax receipts. So people, in our case, there are checks and balances in place, and accountability is something that could be an issue with other platforms, I guess is what you're saying.
We are going to veer off in a slightly different direction, but before we do that, parting is such sweet sorrow. Daryl and Sabrina, we thank you for coming in tonight and helping us out with this. Good to have you both on the program. Coming up next, we're going to explore how technology is shaking up the traditional philanthropy sector right after this. Technology has shaken up many industries and sectors. Is philanthropy immune? Doubt it. We'll continue our conversation now with Bruce McDonald of Imagine Canada, Marina Glogovats of Canada Helps, Caroline Riseborough, who is with the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and Mark Bloomberg, who is with Bloomberg Siegel LLP. Let's start with this. Technology, especially the internet, has brought massive changes to basically everything that we do in life: banking, media, travel, dating, watching television, everything. I want to get a better understanding of what it's done to your lives. Marina, do you want to start us off here?
Yes, I can. I mean, as I said, I only got into the charitable sector about 2 years ago. I think on the whole, and I don't know whether you guys agree, I think that technology has transformed the charitable sector less than any of these other areas that you mentioned: music, newspaper. And I think that's understandable because we're dealing with an incredibly complex, this is not a vertical, this is an incredibly complex industry. I mean, obviously the online donations are growing more than, they're growing more than the overall donations. There are lots of new online technologies that charities are using.
That's very easy to give now.
It's very easy to give. It's very easy to give everywhere. There is, there are new, social media obviously has been used by charities and embraced by charities in a big way. And overall, I think the technology has had democratizing and sort of leveling the playing field effect, like it has had in many other areas, in that small charities, big charities have the same access to social media marketing, to sharing, to online, some of the online tools that everybody else has.
Caroline, how has the explosion of technology disrupted and or influenced the way you do business now in traditional charities?
Well, here's where I would see things differently than Marina. I think that the digital and the birth of social has completely disrupted the fundraising sector and charitable sector in many meaningful ways, both good and bad. You know, when I started in this business 20 years ago, it was really easy to send out a direct mail package or advertise your cause on TV, and donors would come to you, and you would be able to reach them through these two mechanisms. Now media is completely fragmented, and it's so much more difficult to be able to reach donors with your cause. And while digital has brought many charities into the homes of individuals that didn't have access before, on very many levels, it's also undermined some of our great fundraising. And then there's this added complexity of a digital divide in Canada. We know some people have access, some people don't. And oftentimes it's people with lesser education, with lower income, they don't have access to digital technologies. And so how do we as a sector, I guess, you know, come together to be able to support those that don't have access and be able to engage them in philanthropy as well? Because you're never too rich to receive, you're never too poor to give. And that's something else that we really don't have answers for at this point.
What do you see, Mark?
I see there has been a huge impact of technology on the charity sector. That being said, I agree with Marina that, in fact, compared to business, there has been a lower amount of utilization. But I would say that many donors have this unfortunate view, or funders, that they don't want a cent of their money to go to administration. And you know what? All computers pretty much are administration. And so what it means is that a lot of the things that charities should invest in to pay for, to be able to be more efficient and more effective and more accountable, there's huge pressure on them not to spend any resources on that, and rather just to hand out the sandwich to the homeless person and not to do the things that are necessary. And also political activities by charities. They're not allowed to do partisan political activities, but they are allowed to have up to 10% of their resources used to deal with political activities where it's non-partisan. And that is very important. So instead of just trying to fix the problem on the street, but also try to change the systems in our society so that they are better. Businesses are involved in the political process, individuals are involved, and if we didn't have charities involved, that would be very negative. So I'm all for more technology utilization by charities, but we have to realize that if we tell charities you can't spend any money on administration, it's going to be very difficult for them, in fact, to be able to spend the money that they need on technology.
Cutting off your nose to spite your face, in a way?
Exactly.
Well, here. And I think the other part is that, you know, the use of technology for charities has not just been about donor management, fund development, and traction. I mean, where it's really also revolutionized the sector is in service delivery. I mean, where you see, you know, you look at the size of the country that we have, and charities are adapting well to be able to deliver programs in the far north or in small and rural communities in ways that they would have never been able to before because of the advent of technology. I think the other part is that I think it's making charities smarter. I think charities that have had the capacity to invest in some of those back-end infrastructures are learning about their business and then are being able to be more strategic, be more market segmented, market oriented in terms of how they invest those lean resources that they have. Technology has really helped us work a bit smarter.
One of the things, though, I want to get a better handle on, Marina, maybe go to you first on this one again. I was interested in the dynamic between traditional charities and these new crowd fundraising things here. And there does seem to be a considerable amount of disquiet among you traditional folks that these guys are eating your lunch. It would be nice if the crowdfunding was in addition to what people already give mainline charities. Is the fear, in fact, that that's not happening, that in fact what they give them, they're taking away from you?
I can't say that because I don't think we know. I don't think we know.
Too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell. I don't know if, I'm not aware of any study that...
Caroline, you speak to that at all?
Well, there has been some interesting research taking a look at the giving patterns of, let's say, millennials versus boomers. So we know that when the millennials hit the boomer age, almost all philanthropy will probably be online. And actually, a lot of them love the crowdfunding platforms because they really have a desire to bring in their peers to philanthropy. So while we saw the boomers and the generation before them want to give to philanthropy because they saw it almost as a duty to give back, this new generation doesn't feel that same duty of giving back. They want to be involved in this because...
really, how do you know that?
Well, there's been studies on this issue, actually. Academic studies that have taken a look at the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation of millennials versus boomers. And they've actually found that millennials are more of a generation me than a generation we. We don't have any millennials at this table, and I feel bad about that right now because I think you're maligning a whole sector of people, and they're not going to be happy to hear that.
Well, I think there's, with the younger generation, there's many great things, including their interest in international philanthropy, which I think is really important. So there's a lot of great things that one can say, and yes, you know, one can look at the broader picture, but when I see a lot of people getting involved with charities, a lot of them are very young people. My main concern is, well, first of all, with a lot of these fundraising platforms, the crowdfunding, some of the money is going to charity, and so that's not really then making a diversion. But my main concern is what we've seen is that already some of these platforms have been going under or being shut down. And you know, how important is it, you know, that there is some sort of regulatory oversight, because basically a lot of money potentially, sometimes it could be millions of dollars, is going into these platforms, and there is really no accountability. Did the money actually go out? Did the money, you know, some of these campaigns I've looked at, I know we talk about the big campaigns with hundreds of thousands, but if you dig a little deeper into these websites, you'll see there have been campaigns going on for 2 years to raise $200, and they're at $20 now. So really, 99% of the people are raising almost nothing. But all those $20, $50, $100 starts to add up to quite a bit of money. And where's the oversight? Who's looking at it? And if you expect the oversight to come from the beneficiary, who ultimately may get a check, they're probably not going to be the ones who are going to do that.
It's interesting, and I think there's some great points. One of the things I find interesting about this boom of crowdfunding is the notion of the idea that it's maybe not either or, and I think that was said before, but the idea of fostering a generosity of spirit that anybody has access to quickly. And I think the charities have been incredibly inventive over the years of adapting to change. You know, I mean, direct mail was invented at some point. Then we saw the ice bucket challenge. I mean, there's all these examples out there. I don't know that it's a bad thing for society, that people are generous of spirit. And I think that it's a way for, you know, now it's up to charities to find their path with the new technology and potentially new values.
But it sounds like you are concerned that they can compete more effectively with the mainstream charities when it comes to impact.
No, actually, I don't believe that to be true. The concern I have about the particular vehicle on the platform is this lack of checks and balances that are in place to understand, is the money going for what it's intended, and are the outcomes that are being derived what the donor hoped they would be. And I think charities have spent a lot of time, do a lot of work on that area to make sure that donors understand that we are in fact helping to transform society.
Can you learn anything from the way they do charitable fundraising? Can the mainstream charities? Yeah?
Absolutely. As I said, there is, I think crowdfunding and all these other technology-driven trends are here to stay. They are going to be driven by millennials. It's fundamentally about a different way, different desire to engage in a different way. I think when I think about a technology-driven future, one thing that I want to say that is, I think, of a biggest concern to me is small, medium-sized charities. So there is a massive long tail in Canada of small and medium-sized charities.
Can you give an example? What's a small and medium-sized one?
Medium and small charity would be someone who typically would have 2, 3, 4, up to maybe 10, 12 people, would be raising annually less than $250,000.
Okay.
And that is actually most charities, right? Like, we don't realize that there is a top-heavy, you know, the distribution curve is very much top-heavy, and most giving goes to top charities who are sophisticated marketers, sophisticated users of technology, and have the capacity, and that's wonderful. But we do have this massive long tail of small charities, and when we go and when you go and visit them, and we work with them, and Canada Helps, you see that technology divide, or, you know, technology haves and have-nots, is really a possibility.
Concerning?
Very concerning, because you look at, you know, charities where that lack of capacity, infrastructure is particularly obvious when you look at their technological infrastructure and their preparedness to actually come into this new era that will be a lot about technology and adapting to all these new things. I mean, I think that's an interesting...
You said earlier you've got tens of thousands of charities on your site that people can give to?
Absolutely.
Who gets most of the money? Name names.
Most of the, well, I can't name names, but most of the money goes to the charities that we all hear about.
You can look at the T3010 filings.
Mark would know this better.
Yeah, you can look at the T3010 filings with the Canada Revenue Agency.
Which organizations get the most money?
You'd have to look it up, and you can, and basically see what the largest amounts are that are going. But it's going to be large charities in general are going to get the largest amounts of money.
Heart and Stroke Foundation?
Yes, unless they do it off their own website, in which case, in some cases, they may not use Canada Helps much. But
in general, yeah, these are just general stats. But
most
they're
charities,
the same in the States as well. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Most charities in Canada have revenue under 100,000. Most charities in Canada do not have one single staff person. So we're talking about the perception of charities being, very large institutions, hospitals, Heart and Stroke Foundation, things like that, and that's absolutely a very important part of the charity sector. But there are also a lot of smaller charities, and for them it is a little bit harder sometimes to grapple with technology and deal with things. So maybe some of this new technology can actually be helpful for them. It can increase the scope of the people that might support them and things like that.
Let's finish off on that, Caroline. How are you going to get the millennials to start giving in a more fulsome way to the mainline charities, online or offline for that matter?
Well, I think actually once millennials mature and they move into the age of that the boomers are now, it's very well that they will probably become more charitable. They'll have more disposable income. They'll realize that it's time to give back. So, I'm not trying in any way to malign the millennials. They play a very, very important role in charity. But I do think as we're starting to see what really motivates their giving versus, let's say, past generations, it really is that sense of coming together with their peers, with their networks, and being able to do something really meaningful and tangible. And so I think that's where some of the digital platforms allow us to do things that we weren't able to do, let's say, 20 years ago.
Gotcha. That's got to be the last word. Oh, actually, one last thing. Mark, where's that accent from?
South Africa.
Because I heard a little, it sounded like a little hint of Irishness in there too. But no, Irish. No. And yours, Marina?
Serbian. Montenegrin.
Okay, Montenegrin. There we go.
Used to be the same country, but now evidently it's not.
We love accents on this show. I love listening to different accents. Okay, thanks to Bruce McDonald, Marina Glogovac, Caroline Riseborough, and Mark Bloomberg for being with us tonight here on TVO.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.